I am actually really geekily excited to share the epigenetic perspective with you. Now, this is typically an upper level psychology perspective. I did not learn this until I was in graduate school, but it's so impactful, it can be so important and powerful that I want to make sure we address it now, right now, right now. So, I'm going to try to condense this into a more real world version, but if you go on to study genetics, biology, developmental psychology, you'll really get into the nitty gritty of epigenomes and the DNA and all that good stuff. I'm going to summarize it for you. So, for decades, we've heard this debate in psychology, nature versus nurture. How much of who we are is from our genetics, our biology, nature, and how much is from our environment, things that happen to us, nurture. And for a long time, people thought it was one or the other, nature versus nurture, this is this or this. Then people realized that some things are probably more nature and some are probably more nurture. And then people said everything's everything, yay! There are still people who believe all of those in some way, shape, or form. But what's really common today is the epigenetic perspective. And it says that the nature versus nurture debate is stupid because there's no such thing as nature versus nurture. Nature is a part of nurture. Your biological development from your genetic code is affected by the environment. You can't take it out. There's no way to do that. So one way to really think that's helpful about this is with identical twin studies. Identical twins come from the same sperm and the same egg. It just splits off after they've already joined. So they have the same DNA, they have the same genetic codes. But identical twins are not exactly the same in every way. And as they grow older, their differences actually increase. So what that tells us is that from the epigenetic perspective, nothing about us is strictly determined without any environmental influence whatsoever. If it was, identical twins would be born exactly the same and they would stay exactly the same throughout their lives. They don't. A couple of potential scenarios to maybe explain this in a helpful way. You all probably have human-shaped heads. Some of your heads are shaped differently than others. Some of you have really high hair, let's say. So the shapes are different, and we have some people who may not be born with the same visual stimuli as other people. But for the most part, we could look at all of us and go, all right, that looks like a humanish head. And you would say, well, that's because we have human DNA. But what would happen if you, actually, the people who created you on the moon or on a planet with no gravity? Because when a sperm and an egg meet and when they develop, there's a moment when the mass that's heaviest is pulled down and it becomes your head. And that wouldn't happen without gravity. So yeah, your DNA, your genetics give you a human head, but not outside of the influence of the environment. It's one and the same thing. So that's a weird example. There's probably not people procreating on the moon right now. Probably. I can actually guarantee. Well, no, I can't guarantee that. Who knows? Here's a better example that may make this and why it's so important really clear. So you may have someone who is pregnant, and as the baby is developing, that DNA is in place, and the genetic code is set up to express itself in specific ways. But let's say the mother is drinking a lot while she is pregnant, which we know alcohol can have negative consequences on the development of human beings in the womb. So the DNA says one thing, but the alcohol in the mother's environment is changing it. It's changing the way it expresses itself. It's not changing the DNA, but it's changing the way it expresses itself. So the DNA in and of itself doesn't do anything. It's how it interacts with that environment. So you could have some of the characteristics you have because your mother drank when she was pregnant with you. Well, why did your mother drink a lot when she was pregnant? Well, maybe she had a lot of stress at her job and she turned to alcohol as a result. So the fact that your mother's boss was a jerk could have made her drink more, which could have influenced the expression of your DNA. Why was your mother's boss a jerk? Well, maybe he was raised by an abusive parent. So your mother's boss's abusive parent could in some way connect the dots, be responsible for your physical development. So that's like a mind. I remember when I learned that for the first time, I just sat there going, everything I knew was a lie, and I don't know how to process anything about who I am. But the point is not to get lost in all that, like I've got to figure out how many generations ago is why my ear looks like this. The point is to recognize from the epigenetic perspective that it's all the same stuff. DNA is simply another part of the environment. It's not nature versus nurture. It's all the same intermingled stuff. And that's why we rarely find studies where it says 100% of people with this genetic code also have this, because there's no such thing as genes without the environment. So that's the basics of the epigenetic perspective. I'm not going to require you to go into all the specifics of chromosomes and all that stuff. I just want you to have an understanding about what the epigenetic perspective says and what it means. Hopefully we've done that.